Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? I'm doing great. It's September 11th. Everyone's doing great on September 11th. It's unfortunate. All the things came crashing together today. The anniversary of September 11th, of course, which, for Donald Trump is a big deal. It was the day that, at least briefly, he had the tallest building in Manhattan. You recall that was his reaction to the 9/11 attacks. My reaction to the 9/11 attacks on the 16th anniversary was to try and bring our new Mac Mini online. I tested it extensively over the weekend, and one thing that we didn't test extensively over the weekend, I tested all the audio, but I did not remember to test with the broadcast server, although I was testing with it on. I didn't test to see whether Justice could hear it. So with a few quick adjustments, thanks very much, Justice, for standing by. Thank all of you for standing by. We lost the first few minutes of the show. I have a recording of some really ridiculous first few minutes of the show with me talking to nobody and cursing my fool head off trying to get this thing up and running. But it works. The Mac Mini should be doing everything that it's supposed to do and doing it all that much more robustly. Greg Dworkin anticipates some weirdness, man. I guess so. But luckily we haven't missed your call yet. We should be up and running and ready for you at any moment. And we'll see whether our Skype works. My Skype call testing service, they're going to kick me off of Skype call testing service. I called them about 4,000 times over the last couple of days and over the weekend. Here comes Greg's call. Let's bring him in and say good morning. Good morning, Greg. Can you hear me?
Good morning. How's the sound?
Nice. Pretty good. No echo for you?
None at all.
All right. Excellent. So I think I have engineered the sound locally in the right way, and that's good news. The only thing was there were a few items missing from my settings in Nicecast. I should have guessed something was going to go wrong, but it's all good now, and it's all working on a super powerful Mac with 16 gigs of RAM, or God only knows what kind of RAM. It's gigs, megs. I don't remember. I remember when it was K, so I'm an old guy.
Well, you can never be too rich, too young, or have enough memory.
Yes. I think. What would you say? I forgot.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
So all of that's good. And okay. I hear a very, very slight echo, but nothing bad. So hopefully it won't sound that bad over the air. But people will let us know. Yeah,
Justice tells me there's a little echo on you. We'll have to iron it out. Lots of echo on Greg. Oh, no. All right. All right. Well, let's see if I can. Maybe it's something I can fix while we're talking. Let us see.
Well, that means it's not the ghost of Skype because this is a new computer.
Right. That's true. It is something else. Lots of echo on that. All right. Well, I'm going to check my settings here and see if things change while we're talking.
Right. If not, I'll just sign off and give you my list.
Yeah. All right. Well, with Skype, it works great. But with a human, never mind. Doesn't work. Okay.
I'll just have Abby give my report.
All right. Maybe we'll do that. And I do have the list, although if you want to make... was there any top items that you want to say? In echo is fine.
Well, 3 things, of course. It's the 9/11 anniversary, and some of the first responders are pretty sick, and there's a story about that.
Yes, okay.
There's desperation in the Caribbean over the hurricane because they're running out of food.
Oh, yeah, that could be.
I'll put those 2 stories at the very big bottom. And then, of course, there's politics. Okay. And one of the politics things, frankly, is a very clever but telling. And by the way, the echo sounds better, so hopefully you fixed it.
All right, yeah, I think I might have found the switch. Also, people were telling me, by the way, some people said, bad echo, but others said, no, not so bad that you have to go, Greg.
All right. Well,
echo is gone, says Justice. All right, it's just a matter of punching buttons.
Good.
Whereas before
so Jeff Greenfield says he's got a little summary of what happened with the deal, and the deal is what I want to talk about.
Okay.
So Chuck Schumer says to Trump, let's repeal and replace Obamacare. And Trump says, how? And Chuck says, you see this Medicare law? You just strike out where it says over 65. And Trump says, done.
See, it's so easy. He was right.
It's so easy. And, one of the things I was telling our Daily Kos people is we were talking about why didn't Obama get it all done, is that history would be so much easier if it were just the way that I misremember it. Obama didn't have, except for about 2 months, the majorities he needed to get stuff done.
True.
And everybody thinks, oh, well, he had these super majorities and could override vetoes, and why didn't he do it all? Actually, governance and legislating is complicated, and that's part of the subject for today. So with an acknowledgement to 9/11 and the story about the sicknesses comes from Newsday, how 9/11 first responders face illness and uncertain future because being exposed to all those toxic fumes 16 years ago turns out to have undesirable consequences way, way later. And so putting up registries and funding illness pools of money for them was important to do. And I don't really know the status of that and whether or not it's been allowed to run out or where that's at. I didn't really get a chance to finish the entire article. But there are memorial walls.
Yes.
And the total number of first responders who died from illnesses linked to the work at Ground Zero is more than 850.
That is pretty incredible. I don't think we mentioned that number enough.
Right. And so that's pretty amazing. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And at the same time, what's going on now, there's a story in the New York Times, desperation mounts in Caribbean islands, all the food is gone. Yeah. And that pretty much encapsulates how bad things are there. When you wipe out 90% of the island, that's what happens. So people have to get food down there.
That is true. I read a little bit over the weekend about the. I was wondering what do the cruise ships do in a situation like this? And as it turns out,
they discharge their passengers. They come to the nearest port. They let everybody out. They leave them at the terminal, and they go, or they anchor the ship. But either way, you're out.
Yes, they don't run their cruises. Although there was some very, very interesting variety of responses, and I understand Royal Caribbean actually did put. I don't know whether it was ships that were currently running passengers or otherwise mothballed ships, but they've been doing some boat lift from affected islands, dropping off some supplies and picking up both stranded tourists and natives of the island who need to get the hell out of there.
That's what they're doing now after the storm. Before the storm, they were just dropping people off and hunkering down.
Well, if you don't do that and your boat sinks, you can't help later.
Right. I mean, but they didn't exactly, they didn't turn north and take them all up to New York City. They just let them off wherever, and that it might have been an affected area, let's say, in Florida.
Yeah, that could be. Oh, yeah, a lot of people I know who evacuated Miami and ran to the West Coast and then said, oh, but it was storm turned, but it was too late to drive back to the east, and they just waited it out there. Not as bad by a long shot as the islands, of course.
Right. So there's that. The Pundit Roundup this morning has that and other things. And, of course, here's some interesting pieces. The Miami's Republican mayor to the Trump administration, this is all in the Pundit Roundup. Miami's Republican mayor to the Trump administration. This is the time to talk about climate change.
It is. It's a good point. But he is Republican, and it's weird.
Yeah, and John McCain said the same thing. McCain breaks with Trump. We must address our changing climate. I have that, too, also in the Pundit Roundup.
Wow, he's like from no party, that guy.
I know.
Maverick.
And then I have some fascinating pictures of Irma hitting the islands.
Yeah.
And
did you send those?
The water was missing. These are people that went up to the shore and were out on jetties, usually in the water.
That's where they put the jetties.
There's no water.
Yeah, I saw the
ocean got sucked up into the hurricane, and so the tide went out. And even in Tampa Bay, people were walking on the bay floor, which was really stupid because guess what? The water comes back.
Yes, well,
sometimes very quickly.
Happened. Yeah,
that's what happens in tsunamis.
Right. Yeah, people get fascinated.
The water goes out, and you think you can go ahead and walk on the ocean, and then you find out to your dismay, no, you can't.
Yeah, It's weird that people don't say, geez, something's terribly wrong, as opposed to, I'm going for a walk.
Right. So Tampa Bay was frantically tweeting, get off the bay floor, get out of there. The water's coming back. It's dangerous. Don't be there.
Put it on
But
the
there's
back
these
of the-
pictures of folks just like wandering.
Yeah, yeah. I can see the fascination, certainly, but also I can see drowning. So
Right.
that's bad.
So Ronald Klain, who was Joe Biden's chief of staff, and a very competent administrator, which is why he was made czar of the pandemic,
Yes.
has a great reminder about how it's. And you'll know this from gun sense stuff. Situation before a major hurricane, according to Scott Pruitt. Is this the right time to discuss climate change? No, we're focused on preparation. Well, what about during a major hurricane? No, we're all about the storm. What about after? No, we're working on recovery. Well, what about in between? What climate change? If it were real, we'd be having a major hurricane right now, you idiot.
Right. I did have someone in my Twitter feed suggest swapping, and maybe we could talk about guns during the hurricanes and climate change during gun crises.
There were still people in Florida trying to shoot the hurricane down, I read.
Many thousands. I don't know how many of them were serious. I guess we'll find out as we compile gun fail stories. But yes, there
Is this
was
like
at
a
least,
cargo cult thing?
I guess there were definitely people who were just doing it for a goof and didn't shoot. And
good.
then there were some people who I think were trying to say, well, scientifically, in their minds, counter out there, just fire into the rotation, and then all the kinetic energy of thousands and thousands of rounds of ammunition will counteract the what? Okay, well, I mean, not okay. Don't do it. I don't know. I hope nobody actually did it, but it was a little frightening because it's Florida and it's possible that people would have.
Well, this is a show mainly about
Sadly.
politics, at least the
Yes.
part I'm on. So let's go back to that
right.
Jeff Greenfield observation
Those guys.
with Chuck and Nancy and Donald, which is an interesting threesome. So Axios has this piece about Paul Ryan, and this is something we've emphasized for years. Sounds smart, it says. Ryan, like John Boehner before him, has found being Speaker sounds more powerful than it actually is. Lawmakers no longer need party leaders for money and exposure because the power is swung to the grassroots. And social media has helped that a lot, by the way. And without the ability to hand out legislative goodies such as earmarks, money for projects and districts, the modern speaker is simply playing a weaker hand. But sound even smarter, ignore episodic stories about Ryan's demise. There are no Republicans with the clout or support to take him on. They know the job is impossible in this environment. That's why there's been a recent run of weak and troubled speakerships, Boehner and now Ryan. And so they're talking about on the Republican side. I still maintain that the smart thing to do is what Trump did, which is to say cut out the Freedom Caucus and let them understand that they can't have everything they want because it's the only way to get them to know how to compromise. They've never had to. They were elected in an area where they never did, and they haven't a clue as to how to do it. But that's aided and abetted by the weak speaker who refuses to go with Democratic votes at times. And if the caucus knew that he would on occasion, it would really help to control some of their more radical tendencies. He never does it, and so they don't know that.
Yes. Well, Boehner did it, and they ousted him. So I
But here's the
understand
other side of the
reticence.
coin, though, and then I want to get to a political science article on this.
Okay.
Muted backlash to Trump's bipartisanship signals warning for GOP. This is a piece by Michael Shearer in the Washington Post. It may be his first Washington Post piece. I think he moved over from one of the news magazines.
Okay.
And the basic thrust is Trump cuts a deal with the Democrats. And what does the base do? They say, that's Paul Ryan's fault.
Oh.
It used to be that any Republican who would make a deal with the Democrats would get primary from the right.
Right. Correct.
So Trump does it. And the base says, fantastic, you should have been doing this a long time ago. And so he says, well, the game has certainly changed.
Yeah.
The old rules of GOP politics held that any Republican who stepped out of line to seek compromise with Democrats risked immediate attack for ideological heresy, or worse, squishiness and weakness. But Trump's call for a much stronger coming together with Democrats last week earned him little direct public criticism from Republican lawmakers or activists. When they say activists, they're talking about talk radio. who are wary of power among the base. Instead, party leaders across Washington turn the focus of their ire on the continued dysfunction among Republicans.
Yeah, they did do that, and I thought, I mean, it was understandable from some quarters, but yeah, I was a little bit puzzled as to why the usual suspects in the activist class didn't. Some did. It just didn't really resonate much, and maybe he really look out if you're on Fifth Avenue, I guess.
Trump has tied his fortunes to a growth in the share of voters more focused on shaking up the system than in prescribing specific ideas for its replacement. Remember, they don't have any ideas, and he certainly doesn't. The 2009, and by the way, the ideas they do have are incredibly unpopular. I have a different piece from Jill Lawrence from USA Today, which is highlighted in the Pundit Roundup, about how all of their ideas, the Ryan ideas, people hate them, from repeal, replace to the tax cut for rich people. So they
Trump
don't have
that
ideas that are popular in the rare circumstance where they actually have an idea. I don't think they have any ideas for infrastructure. That's why they didn't start with that. The 2009 Tea Party rebellion, Shearer writes, in the Republican Party, which began as a demand for less government spending, seamlessly morphed into broad support for Trump's 2016 campaign, despite his promises to resist cuts to government entitlement programs and his disinterest in lowering federal deficits. There's an element of the core base in both the Democratic and Republican Party, this is the interesting paragraph, that is more non-ideological and anti-establishment than any other aspect of their political view, said Josh Holmes, a former chief of staff to McConnell who helped lead the Republican effort to defeat Tea Party challengers in the 2014 elections. Taken to its logical conclusion, that means they'll support anybody, regardless of their ideology, that is intent on opposing the powers that be. And that helps explain the some, at least, of the Bernie voters in the primary who then voted for Trump.
Some, yes.
Some.
Well, yeah, and that's a pretty small group as it is, but okay.
It is. It's a small group. Smaller. It's a small sliver, but there are people that definitely thought that. I'm not talking about the obnoxious Russian bots who were on
well, that's
social
a whole different
media.
Story.
Yes. They didn't vote. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about people who didn't talk to anybody and who sort of just did that.
Yes, and many of those people, though we did mention that some of them may have been registered Democrats for a long time, I don't think they count among the activist class of Democrats. No.
Yep.
Okay.
But they fit well into the idea of what Republicans really want anyway. So the trend could have significant implications not only for the coming legislative negotiations, but for the midterm elections. Republican lawmakers are bracing for the possibility that Trump will involve himself in primary elections to challenge incumbent Republican senators in Arizona and Nevada. And it goes beyond that because Steve Bannon gave an interview both to Politico and to CBS, 60 Minutes, which essentially said, yeah, we're going to fuel challenges in the primaries.
Yeah, right back to what we were talking about being threatened from the right all the time. But it just didn't happen on Trump this one time for this one deal anyway. It's just interesting to see that's still alive, yes?
Trump's 2016 campaign pollster, John McLaughlin, not from the McLaughlin Report, that's somebody different, who continues to consult with the White House, conducted an online poll for conservative groups late last month that found 68% of likely Republican voters in 2018 thought it was time to replace McConnell and Ryan in Congress. In a separate question, 49% of all likely voters polled, including 46% of Republicans, said the same Republican leadership was supporting the swamp that Trump had promised to drain. So I would vote that way in a poll.
Yes.
I don't really care that Trump promised to drain it. There's no question McConnell and Ryan are part of the problem. But I'm a Democrat. It's interesting that Republicans sort of feel that way too.
Yes. Well, they would be right to do so. But yes. Okay. Oddly, I'm glad that they are, we keep hearing more and more stories about them waking up bit by bit. I don't know if that's going to change their support, but at least they know what's going on.
Well, so McLaughlin says among these likely voters, they're more supportive of the president because he's trying to get things done, and they're sending a warning message to Republican majority. They want to get things done. There's a lot of Americans who want to get stuff done. That's why this deal is going to be popular. Which is to say, get rid of the debt ceiling at least for a while.
Right. Are you able to hear the music today, by the way?
Yeah. Here we go.
Okay, good. We've engineered that correctly, too. So we are.
And so we'll see you after the break, right?
Yeah, well, we got a few seconds to talk our way out of the break, but why don't we talk about how we're going to talk our way out of the break, and then we'll come back after the break, which we're about to take, let's say, now. How about now? You in agreement with that?
Okay, how about now?
Okay, excellent. Okay. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio. We're getting the hang of these things here. I think we're getting our breaks timed about right. We'll have to see. It's been an interesting phenomenon dealing with these the breaks and all the new technology, but everything seems to be working. Greg's still here, so we can continue on. I just remembered I forgot to mute the phone. So next break, I'll leave and mute the phone. But you're used to hearing that ringing. Okay. Still with us, Greg?
I'm still here.
Excellent. Let's.
So we're going to pick off where we left off, which is a Michael Shearer piece that's in the Washington Post today about Trump and his relationship to the Republican Party. And let me frame the big picture for you. You will see, and I realized I was getting angry every time I saw this until I realized there's really a different way of looking at it. You'll see lots of people say, don't pay attention to the polls. Remember that Trump was really low in the polls and he won anyway, and that Trump's support from the base is solid, yada, yada. And you read this and you say, what is this? Don't you understand that like 3/4 of the country cannot stand him? Well, more than 51% absolutely can't stand him, and the rest really have lost tolerance for him. And that's why he's at 36, 38% in the polls. Maybe he got a 2-point upsurge because of the deal and or the hurricanes in his response. But that's still pretty bad in a historical level. But you have to step back and realize, if you look at it only within the context of the Republican Party,
yes,
which is what this article is doing, then it all makes sense. Don't count Trump out means don't count Trump out within the base of the Republican Party. Trump may still win re-election means he might still win re-election within the Republican Party. Just add that at the end of every statement, and then it all makes sense. Now, what he's doing with everybody else is a different story altogether. But here, Shearer writes again, Trump's support with the Republican Party has fallen somewhat since his inauguration, but remains about 70% in most surveys. 70% is historically low.
Yeah.
It's usually 80 to 90. Among people who back Trump in the primary, the support is even stronger. That stands in marked contrast to Trump's overall approval ratings among American adults, which hovers around 40. Actually, it's less. A poll by Fox News at the end of last month found that 56% of voters thought Trump was tearing the country apart, while the same percentage said he did not respect racial minorities. In the same survey, more than half of voters answered not at all when asked if Trump was honest, compassionate, or a moral leader.
Yes, I think I would do the same.
But for Trump, his base support has always mattered more. And then I would add, for reporters writing this stuff up, his base support has always mattered more. And a lot of the people who write this don't distinguish between what they observed during the primary and how loyal Trump primary supporters are. You have to distinguish that from the overall group as a whole. For Trump, his base support has always mattered more, and it has continued to complicate the efforts of the self-styled intellectuals of the conservative movement who want to continue to frame political fights along an ideological axis. Ben Sasse of Nebraska was one of several Republicans who rushed to the microphones after Trump cut a deal with Democrats to try to reclaim his language and his time, I suppose. What we're doing in this body today is not draining the swamp, he announced on the Senate floor before the vote on Trump's deal with Democrats. What we're doing is running a whole bunch of hoses to the edge of the swamp, turning them on the highest possible volume flow, and then turning our backs.
That is beating a metaphor to death, but
it is. And so Shearer writes, that's a statement that would make sense for voters who define the swamp as government with more progressive priorities. But the president believes his adopted party has moved on to different goals. And in this, Trump is right, and the rest of the Republicans are completely wrong, which is why they're so flummoxed. And that's why Ryan's unpopular, historically unpopular program and ideas just doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah,
the people in the United States want to see it coming together, at least to an extent, with different parties, Trump said Thursday at the White House. His bet is that as long as he can demonstrate disruption of the established order, the Republican electorate will be willing to come along for the ride. And the Democratic electorate, of course, he didn't write, will applaud because they think that Chuck and Nancy are taking Trump for a ride.
Yeah.
As with that comment by Jeff Greenfield about just strike out the over 65 and Trump will say yes.
Yeah, there were a lot of theories going on around about that. Of course, there was also the theory that if you just told Trump that he was fantastic and then put that in front of him, he might sign that too.
And Schumer's much better at that than McConnell is.
He really is. That's definitely true. And there will definitely be times when we're trying to figure out, well, now is Chuck trying to be slick here, or is he actually this centrist, or what is happening here?
You're just pulling on the things that you know work and that you can share. For example, Chuck Schumer, not Mitch McConnell, can turn to Trump and say, we're not just both New Yorkers, but both of us realize the value of a camera.
Yes. And he
don't get, in between Chuck Schumer and a camera is the old line in Washington for years and years. So Schumer can say that to Trump, and Trump will nod his head because it's true.
Yeah, he doesn't know.
McConnell can't say that. They don't have that kind of, chemistry.
Well, no one really.
Those are the things that are important to Trump. That's why I'm bringing it up. I don't care.
That's absolutely true.
But he does.
And we also will occasionally be fooled. Chuck Schumer should not be thought of as your progressive buddy either. That's not what he's doing.
No, but he's good at what he does, which is leading the conference caucus. Which are they?
We say caucus. The Democratic caucus. They say conference.
Yeah. Well, whatever. He's a decent leader in terms of pulling people together. Now, why is that important? This is going to become more important, and it's not necessarily in support of progressive politics. But Julia Azari has a great piece here in 538, Why Republicans Can't Govern.
An actual why.
Yeah.
I mean,
Trump's deal with Democrats shows that controlling the White House and Congress isn't enough. She's a political scientist, and it's a really quite good article and helps, again, to put things into perspective.
She's definitely not.
So basically, Trump is not getting 100% support from congressional Republicans. He is getting support from the Republican base. He doesn't get support from Democrats, and independents are wary. And what's going on here? Well, Trump is still playing to the base, even when he makes deals with Democrats, because he's taking the base with him. But Julia Azari steps back and says, of course, that complicates things for McConnell and Ryan. You might think that securing the White House, Senate, House of Representatives, and majority of seats on the Supreme Court would enable a party to practically dictate laws and policy.
I did think that prior to this.
So far,
unified
government hasn't worked out too well for Republicans. The GOP has controlled both houses of Congress and the presidency since January, but has no major legislative accomplishments to show for it. Trump finally managed to close a big deal last week to stave off a government shutdown and Treasury default for the next 3 months and secure hurricane disaster relief. And yet he cut the deal with Democrats against the wishes of the GOP leaders. One thing the Republicans have done, however, is demonstrate that controlling government isn't enough to govern.
True.
Right? So they're into power. And we've said this on the show for years, haven't we? Governance is a completely different animal. And the House has never learned how to do it. Since the U.S. system is designed to slow down and complicate attempts at change, even parties in control of the whole government have to learn how to navigate it. What makes it so hard? There are several things that a majority party needs in order to convert political victories into legislative ones, and the GOP doesn't have them. For example, do you have this link?
Yes, I do. I just can't read.
Oh, okay.
Thanks for
prioritized agenda. Well, your readers can't read it by holding it up to the microphone, so I'm going to read it for them.
Yes, that's what we do. Okay.
A prioritized agenda. This one seems obvious, but can be deceptively difficult. Research shows that agenda control is a key source of power for the majority party in Congress. Yes. You know this well. For a party to effectively implement an agenda, it has to, number one, agree on what the agenda is, and two, how that agenda should be prioritized. The first part isn't a given. Republicans largely support lower taxes, but as the recent healthcare debate showed, they are less unified on healthcare policy. And of course, when they talk about prioritization, I would add the obvious example there is, so what did they do? They did healthcare first.
Right, because
they don't have a policy and they weren't unified.
Right.
So they did it first. Now, as a interested observer, I would look at that and say, how stupid is that?
It's a good question.
Even when there's agreement on the issues, parties must also decide on which ones to focus. Democrats, for example, controlled the White House, Senate, and House in the post-New Deal. Most of Harry Truman's presidency from 61 through 69 under Kennedy and Johnson, and again from 77 to 81 on Carter. They had to decide what policy goals to prioritize. Economic reforms, healthcare, arts and education, rural development, urban revitalization, civil rights. Some leaders like Johnson were able to tie many domestic issues together, while others like Carter came off as unfocused. Healthcare reform wasn't prioritized, and it remained on the Democratic to-do list all the way to Clinton and Obama. Modern Republicans face an additional problem. Much of the party's stated governing ideology rests on the premise that government is the problem, which makes it difficult to develop a coherent agenda for determining what the government should do. And currently, there isn't much else unifying a party fragmented along the lines of ideology, openness to compromise, and support for the president. Trump's own approach to policy, meanwhile, hasn't helped the party set priorities because obviously he's Trump. He doesn't know what he's doing.
Right.
Then there's another issue, which is public support, and deals with the fact that it's incredibly unpopular what Ryan is trying to do. And then there's another piece here, which I think you might find interesting. I certainly did. A way to address internal divisions. Even with a governing agenda and public support, there'll be disagreements over specifics, clashes between factions, disputes over resource allocations. Institutions can help resolve these disputes, especially organizational rules in Congress that create incentives for compromise. The strong committee model of the mid-20th century provided this, and that's what John McCain, by the way, means when he keeps saying, let's get back to regular order.
Yes, true, strong committee model.
This approach wasn't perfect. There were plenty of conflicts, and critics complained about the lack of party discipline and ideological definition, but it did allow for greater legislative productivity. Ideologic diversity brought its own negatives, of course, including tolerating objectionable viewpoints for the sake of forming a wider coalition. We can't talk about the mid-century Democratic Party without considering its Southern contingent, which held back progress on civil rights and also pushed back against issues like labor and wage protection that might benefit black workers. Mid-century Democrats compromised with their racist faction, sometimes sacrificing the interests of racial minorities for the sake of moving forward on policy. Now, the Republican Party includes the successors to this Southern faction, people like Richard Shelby, as well as immigration hardliners. But the political climate has changed since the 60s. Many overtly racist attitudes have fallen out of favor, except with Jeff Sessions, while New Deal Democrats, sometimes governed by accommodating racists, a practice with a lasting, damaging legacy. These kinds of compromises may no longer be politically viable. So, in conclusion, the U.S. system just isn't set up to let majority parties do what they want. So it's hard. And what's the outlook? Various public breaks between Trump and congressional Republicans illustrate the GOP coalition hasn't figured it out yet. An opposition party has the luxury of unifying objective. As the musical Hamilton tells us, governing is harder.
Did they say that?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is a very political science-y piece. That's
for
sure. Very interesting. A lot to talk about. A couple of areas of departure, I would say. I think just right at the end, it's true that the U.S. I would have to agree the U.S. system isn't set up to let majority parties do whatever they want, but I'm not certain that internal factional conflict among the parties is what was part of the design. It just it's a complicated system, and it certainly leaves
evolved
the door,
over time, just like urban sprawl, not because people designed it.
Yeah, it was designed, I guess you could say it was sort of negatively designed that way, in that it only works if there's broad agreement on goals, whether intra-party or inside the parties or as between the parties. And so that leaves the door open anytime that your majority party is, in fact, a broad coalition to dissent and disarray. But, I don't think that they really meant. Remember also that a lot of these founders were railing against the evils of faction, and by which some think that they meant political parties, but they almost certainly contemplated factions within political parties as well. But,
and don't forget, the original blog here
you don't have to
that Julia Azari started
there.
Was called Mischiefs of Faction.
Ah, yes, that's true, too. There's nothing wrong with that assertion. She's got it right, I would say. It's just, I think I would add a couple of things to it. You don't have to design faction into a system. just there. Any system you design, if it includes people, it'll include faction. It's already baked in. True, but generally speaking, absolutely true. And holding the majority, or even the majority in both houses, plus the presidency, doesn't automatically mean anything unless you really are a homogeneous party. And it would be awfully difficult to elect majorities across the board in all branches, without in a country of 300 million people. I don't know how you could do it. There's got to be some, you could just the Clone Wars, I guess, and do it that way. But if you have different people from different areas who with different sensitivities to how they'll fare in their general elections or primary elections, you're going to come up with differences like that. That's interesting. They lay out a great framework here. Yeah.
So it's interesting that if you step back and do those two pieces together, Michael Shear's, what's happening within the Republican Party and Trump and how the base goes with him, not the leaders, and Julia Azari's point about how everything is, cut back and complicated if you're trying to get stuff done, and governance is a different animal altogether. And put that together with Trump's inability to focus more than 15 seconds at a time and only remembering the last person that he spoke to.
Yes.
And add that Steve Bannon's desire to have a bunch of, what was her name, Christine O'Donnell, I am not a witch, have a bunch of people like that, primary current people. I see, for example, over the weekend, Reichert, Republican in Washington State, and Charlie Dent from Pennsylvania, Tuesday Group, are retiring. And I saw a report this morning, Bob Corker from Tennessee is thinking about retiring. I mean, this is very difficult for people who went in trying to get stuff done and realize that there's just no way this is happening, and Trump is making it worse.
Yeah, although they might have enjoyed last Friday and the weekend.
That's the thing. They might have, except it was with the other party. And, again, Trump did what, I think should happen, make more deals with Democrats. And I think part of the problem is that even if it's an 80-20 split, if you split the party on the one hand because the base wants to go with Trump, not leadership, and Bannon threatens to primary people who aren't following Trump, you run the risk, even more so, of, for example, losing the House. If you lose the House, subpoena power and the ability to investigate then turns over to the Democrats. That makes life for Republicans really complicated. What if you start exploring the ways that they were accommodating both Trump and the Russians from 2018 onward?
That would be bad for that other side.
Right.
Them.
That would be a very, very difficult situation.
And I would be very pleased. Although then I would very quickly begin to become frustrated with the pace of investigation and disappointed.
Right.
But that's okay. It would turn up eventually what we need to turn up. I just think it would end up as end notes to the administration rather than justice delivered.
Right. Okay. And with that, I think I'll leave you. Thank you so much. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with the new and improved David Waldman, Kagro in the morning.
I'm the same one.
Yeah, well, the show's better.
Computer.
So I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll do it again. And in the meantime, you got a lot to talk about.
Yes, and I will. Maybe I can make my own echo on this side. And I'll be lonely without you, Greg. Thanks for getting me started.
It can happen.
I'm pleased that everything worked. I'm pleased that we got the. I really thought we were in for disaster at the beginning there, but
no disaster.
Not too bad, huh?
Disaster. Yeah, no, it's great. Anyway, take care, and I'll talk to you.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for getting us started here and for your patience with the engineering difficulties. All good here. I spent a lot of the weekend trying to archive all of the August shows and get them on a DVD and get them off of the laptop, clean up some space. And I realized I'm conscious of this every time we have to take time out and pre-record a show. Now it occurs to me that I don't have much in the way of available reruns that have the breaks built in, and it's like impossible. I'm thinking, I mean, you can do it, but it's almost impossible to engineer our breaks back into the reruns. So I'm desperate to create a library going forward of files of our show, our podcast, that have the breaks incorporated. And the first couple days of trying to manage the breaks are kind of disastrous, and it does all sorts of weird things to I got used to how long a file should run without our breaks, and it should run the same length of time with the breaks. But then when you when I edit for the podcast, I take the breaks out more or less. By the way, podcast listeners, I would like to solicit your comments on how those breaks are handled. At the moment, at first I started fading the music out and then fading it back in, but it's actually kind of time consuming. And instead I began cutting the music so that it led from the outro music a few seconds and then just cut straight into the other side, a few seconds of intro music. But I wondered whether those little skips from the way out to the way in are somehow disconcerting to those of you listening, or whether you don't even notice it, or maybe the music is too long. It probably plays for about 10 seconds. Always interested in suggestions on how we can improve things. But a lot of time spent trying to save the shows and getting myself confused about when should the break be coming in and going out on the tapes versus live. Live, I think we got the hang of it. Okay. Seems like we're still doing pretty good here, and the show is pretty robust. Very happy with the Mac Mini now that it's up and running. It's a nice little computer, and it fits nicely. I don't have to make much space on the desk. I have a little bit of a confusing setup. Of course, the Mac Mini doesn't come with a monitor, and I was going to go and buy a separate one, but I don't have room on my desk for another monitor. As it turns out, my PC is plugged into a monitor through the old, I don't remember which kind of video cable it is, but the HDMI port was still open on this. So I just plugged it in there. So now if I just change the input, my one monitor is either a PC or the Mac Mini. It's just weird and hard to get used to. Oh, by the way, anybody who actually knows their way around a Mac environment, this new Mac Mini, the display is like too big for my screen, and my menu bleeds off. The dock with all the icons is okay, mostly visible, but up at top, the menus of the system or whatever you're on, the Apple up there, and the Finder and File, Edit, View, all that stuff, and my clock bleeds off the top. And I think that's it's fixable. If I found lots of instructions on how to fix that if you're dealing with Apple TV, but nothing that seemed to work for my monitor. So if anybody's got any suggestions about how I can make that work, let me know. I went into the system preferences and into display, but none of the things I tinkered with in display have made that work so far. So we'll open source the tech support of the show as well. That's another fun aspect of doing our live show and our wacky podcast here. Let's turn now, though, to Pocket and see what the hell I put in Pocket that I was sure when I put it there would entertain you, the listener. And now I'm not so certain anymore. Now everything just looks so silly. But here's speaking of silly, here's a good one. This is fun. This is not news. It's a good Monday story. Dream Rebel, who sent me this one, it's Dream Rebel from Twitter, who tweets under the handle of Jimenez Writes, W-R-I-T. It's a writer, Jimenez. But, can you spell that? How's your Spanish spelling, everybody? Jimenez. And Writes, of course. How's your English spelling? It's Writes. So anyway, this one was really something. And picking up on a recurring theme of the show, though I don't know that it was necessarily the show where it got picked up, but rather it could have been Twitter. As you know, I think everything in the world is a sex cult. That explains almost everything in the world. As a default, you should consider that the motivation for anything that you are puzzled by or can't figure out is probably sex at some level. I don't know why that is, human beings and all. If you can figure it out, you've probably already figured out that it is sex, and you're right. But I like to remind everybody that, let's see, the alt-right is a sex cult. Somebody might call me on this one day. You said the alt-right is a sex cult. You also said Fox News is a sex cult. Plus you said Trump World is a sex cult. You just think everything's a sex cult. One, that is true. I do think that. And two, those are three names for very much the same phenomenon. There are differences, of course. There are factions. There's splits. There's places they depart from one another, but they're tied together. Yes, by ideology, but I would maintain that maybe the ideology has a lot more to do with their sex cultism than might first meet the eye. There's a lot of disguising and masking going on everywhere in the world. Politics, no exception, and right-wing politics, certainly no exception. So I've said the alt-right is a sex cult for slightly different reasons. The alt-right is a sex cult because it's made up of largely men's rights activists types who are pretty sure, really certain in their own minds, that the reason they don't have relationships, the reason they can't get a girlfriend, the reason they can't, as they like to say, the reason I can't get laid is feminism. Feminism's ruined the world, and so therefore feminists who are, generally speaking, liberals, maybe they're at fault too, and maybe not only is it feminist, because it can't just be that feminism is defeating us, because that would be women defeating us, and I don't believe in that, because believing in that would be feminism. You see, it's a little bit of a feedback loop. But it can't just be women defeating us all by themselves because they're not powerful and can't lift weights like we do. Of course they can. In many cases, I would say women who lift weights habitually probably lift more than most of the dudes involved in, say, the Proud Boys or whatever else, with rare exceptions, I'm sure. But the reason that that they don't have sex is the feminists have convinced all the women that they don't need to have sex with us, which they don't, but they're not supposed to convince them of that. But they can't believe that women are defeating them. So really also it's liberal men, milquetoast, wishy-washy cucks who roll over for liberal feminism are enabling the women to defeat us, and so they're even worse. We got to get rid of them too, and liberals in general, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so yeah, the alt-right, they're a little bit even more, how would we say this? Well, they're more at fault for their own sex cult status, and of course their sexless status as well. It's obviously their fault, but they're a little more open about their sex connection. One, because of the men's rights thing, and two, because these fight, I hesitate to even bother calling them fight gangs, like, the Proud Boys thing. Do you remember when I shared with you the video of the Proud Boys? They were so proud of themselves for only admitting their new members through beat-ins. That is to say, you would declare yourself a Proud Boy in some stupid public ceremony, and then they'd all beat you up. But then it was sort of like, well, they'd all punch you. But it isn't even that it's not like Fight Club. They sock you in the face and bloody you up. It looked like a tickle fight. And, maybe there are rougher ones out there, but it shouldn't surprise you when you get a good look at the people who make up these gangs, and they are gangs. You're curious about why they would join such a thing, unless they just saw Fight Club enough times that they really believed that fighting a whole lot just by itself, or being around people who fight a lot, would get them in shape. Anyway, moving on to, other things. Fox, of course, a sex cult because everybody's getting fired left and right because they're harassing all the women there. And that was even more overt. And Roger Ailes clearly ran the place. It was almost like the news production stuff was like a cool hobby that attracted women to the occupation, and then you could try and bribe some sex out of them. And they, P.S., we also put something on the air that sort of looks like news. And then, of course, Trump World is just rife with, their sex cultism is all over the place, including the weird ways in which Donald used to recruit people to buy units in his buildings. We'll remind you a little bit more about that after this break. are back with more of the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio. Thanks for hanging with us through the first hour and through our second break. Sounds like everything is on the up and up here. When we left, I was telling you why everything in the world is a sex cult, and some of this may be review, but it's the beginning of the school year, so it stands to reason. Don't get bored. Just to think of how you will deal with your thesis coming back. Okay. Let's see. Where were we with this? Yes, I was explaining that Trump world is a sex cult all over as well, but with particular emphasis on old stories about the way Trump used to sell units in his buildings. Back when he owned the Plaza Hotel, he was sort of infamous for this, and when he was first filling up Trump Tower. Of course, the casinos contributed to this, and he integrated. He was brilliant at vertically integrating the businesses that he had put together, the modeling agency, the beauty pageants. It didn't seem to make a great deal of sense to anybody who was watching him as a real estate developer. And it was sort of like, well, you know, and back in the day, I guess this was the dying days of when it was still sort of acceptable to be like, well, he's just a millionaire playboy. I mean, it's still acceptable in the sense that they can get away with it, but everybody, you know, looks at you funny. But then they, you know, if you have $1 billion, a millionaire playboy, that's just lame. No one cares about that. Billionaire playboy, you can still get away with it. But I mean, just sort of like the, I don't know, the Mad Men era kind of thing where it was just sort of expected, and maybe it's still expected, and I'm just a moral scold. I don't know, but you know, the idea that it's not that he's doing this as a business interest per se. It's just, well, why does he buy a beauty pageant or a modeling agency? Well, he likes beautiful women. And that was all the explanation he needed, which was, you know, I like to be able to pressure these beautiful women into having sex with me or my friends so that they will buy condos from me. And that was sort of an unacknowledged part of this. But we talked a little bit about it. We definitely read an article about how he used to use the Plaza Hotel. He would take out the corner suites on a floor, and he would have these weekend-long parties that weren't, you know, they weren't just out and out orgies per se. He didn't really organize them that way. He was just sort of a swingy party kind of guy, and he would stock the place with women from his modeling agencies and beauty pageants, and, you know, bring in the liquor. And occasionally it was alleged some drugs as well. So, you know, booze and drugs. And that was just sort of an 80s thing. It wasn't like a Donald Trump branded cocaine or anything, but it might not have been a bad idea. Allegedly, he himself doesn't drink, et cetera, et cetera. But he would make for a very obvious party atmosphere. And the idea was then he would then people the party. He would invite to the parties to enjoy all of the entertainment he had provided. Prospective buyers, whether they had actually said they were prospective buyers or he just thought they were prospective buyers because they were rich and they liked the things he was providing at a party, bring them together. And basically the message was he would just walk around from room to room like an impresario at the different suites and drop in on the different sorts of party atmospheres going on. And the idea was, you like this party? It's a party all the time. It's 24/7 party over at Trump Tower. Imagine if Donald Trump can put this together for you here at the Plaza Hotel. Imagine what I can do for you at a private residence of such unsurpassed luxury as the Trump Tower is going to be, or the Trump World Tower, or whatever else he was putting up. That was the idea, that the people who live there are going to be the people who like partying like this, who have access to parties like this, who could put together parties like this themselves because they're all millionaires, billionaires, and a little freaky, and, you know, whatever. I don't mind you want to spend your time that way. I am a moral scold. I will scold you for it. But in the end, I'm not going to stop you, and you don't give a damn that I'm scolding you. You're having a great time, right? So keep on going. What do I care? What do you care? More importantly, that's how he populated Trump Tower. So I wanted to remind you all of that, and remind you of how he would create this party atmosphere. And every time he would have a launch party for his condos and stuff. Again, Miss Universe pageant contestants are showing up, and it's just sort of becomes a thing. And I think that probably explains why there's a pretty significant number of rich people who have units in more than one Trump building. And it's sort of like, well, they have different party atmospheres. Or I just love going to those parties so much, and the price of admission is buying one of these units. And fine, I can put my girlfriend in one, and I can live in the other, and my kids can have that one. And, you know, I'm sure there's all sorts of justifications for it. Anyway, it's good background for discussion of this piece that that Dream Rebel, or Jimenez writes, had sent to me. I had never heard of this one. And the tweet does say, have you already read about this? And I hadn't. It's a Wikipedia entry on Trump Tower, the novel. Have you ever heard of it? The novel, MF, or do you read it? That's the question here. I hadn't, and I had never heard of it. And it's not unreported, obviously. It's right here at Wikipedia. And you know how they work. They rely on those journalists who never do anything and never report on anything. And we're always, discovering news before they do. No, they're reporting on these things. But it doesn't get widespread play. And how can you fit it in a flurry of scandal and constitutional crisis like Trump is creating? Well, that's where we come in. We have a niche here, and we can exploit it for this. So what is Trump Tower, the novel? By the way, very creative, going out there, creative not only on the subject of the novel, but also the title. In other words, this is a project where, once again, Trump hires a ghostwriter, but the idea is for him, like with Art of the Deal and all his other books, to say, I wrote this. This was supposed to be his debut novel. And what's the subject? Trump Tower. Who's the major protagonist? Well, as it happens, the major protagonist, he's not completely bonkers, is the property manager of Trump Tower. But his major foil, apparently, in all this is, you'll never guess, it's Donald Trump. Donald Trump of Trump Tower. And the subject, Trump and Trump Tower and life in Trump Tower. It's a bit of a stretch. He really explores the outer reaches of his imagination on this one. This is the deal. Now, Trump Tower is a work of fiction in the strictest sense, and I'm sure it's been fictionalized by ghostwriter Jeffrey Robinson, and even the ghostwriting role evolves. I'm going to read the Wikipedia entry, which can be pretty dry and sometimes is repetitive, but it gets all the stuff out there. And besides which, it's the sum total of everything I know about Trump Tower is this stupid Wikipedia article that I got pointed to. I have not done any other outside research on it, but it's fascinating in its own right. Trump Tower is a work of fiction by Jeffrey Robinson, originally accredited to Donald Trump and billed as Trump's debut novel by the publisher. It was first published in 2011, so this is not ancient history. Published in 2011 by Vanguard Press. Trump had previously attempted to create a television series, much more his speed than a book, obviously, a television series titled Trump Tower, again, creative as hell, modeled after Dallas Dynasty and Upstairs Downstairs, which is rather more sophisticated than I thought his viewing habits encompassed. The Dallas and Dynasty I could see obviously being Trump favorites. So you know how it is, high concept, elevator pitch stuff. What's your, all right, so, imagine Donald Trump gets you stuck in the elevator, right? Here's my idea. A television show about Trump Tower. Yeah, about a building? I don't understand. How would that be? Well, it's about life in the Trump Tower. The people, the characters, it's some crazy people in there. And there are. We've learned all about them. Stewie Rah-Rah and other wacko, who, by the way, quite a sex cultist himself, the Russian mobsters, just the celebrities. It's been a real parade of weirdos from start to finish with Trump Tower. So here's my idea. It's a television show about Trump Tower. Yeah, okay, what do you call it? Hang on. Trump Tower. Okay. So what's it's a life in Trump Tower. What, like Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous? Is that what you mean? No, it's like Dallas meets Dynasty meets Upstairs Downstairs. I have to believe like the ghostwriter or a PR person said, throw in Upstairs Downstairs. That's like highbrow. They're going to like that. but it's but I never watched Upstairs Downstairs actually. But as I understand it, of course, it's a little bit about like class interactions. You know, the property owners, the families, the wealthy families, and their domestic servants, and the relationships between them. So that's a little odd to throw in there in the 1980s too, but definitely in keeping with the brand of Trump Tower. Rich people who have everybody else working for them. Dallas meets Dynasty. You mean X meets X? Okay, that's a great blend. I can totally visualize that. Whatever. Okay, so continuing on with the entry. He worked with MVP Entertainment, contracted a writer in Los Angeles, and successfully had Showtime Networks develop a television pilot. I wonder if that's floating around somewhere. Can somebody get that? I'd love to see that. After receiving a payment for television rights to Trump Tower, of course he got a payment, he marketed the idea to Lifetime. I don't know how that worked with the contract, but whatever. When the television series attempt did not pan out, because he fails at most things, Trump published the novel in 2011 by Vanguard Press with ghostwriter Robinson. This original version was later subsumed by the 2012 edition, which removed Trump's name from the cover and credited Robinson as sole author. I think Trump sensed that he could get himself in trouble with lawsuits, probably from people who recognized themselves as characters in the book. Oh no, it's all fictionalized, and I'll take my name off of it, and then people won't think it's me, or they won't think it's real based on my gossip about you. The plot of the book, if you can believe that it has one, is set within a fictional version of Trump Tower. where that's funny. I mean, I know the Wikipedia writer, I'm guessing, is doing their level best at getting this out here. This is a very convoluted story, so to get the chronology right and how he wrote, first he fakes writing it, then he decides to pretend he didn't fake write it, and that's complex enough. But then, it's a fictional version of Trump Tower. Okay, I get the idea that, is it a fictionalized Trump Tower? Like, is it called something else? Is it called Stump Tower, or, the Brump Arms or something? No, it's called Trump Tower. And who lives in there? The character Donald Trump lives in. Oh, it's a fictional version of Trump Tower. It's Trump Tower. Donald Trump lives in it, but I changed everybody else's name. Therefore, it's fictionalized. Well, okay. And I'm sure he also took some liberties in telling people stories, and that's probably fictionalized too. But he probably has been dining out all over New York telling people that those are true stories. But his lawyers told him, when it comes to the book, you got to say it's fictionalized. So there you go. The plot of the book is set within a fictional version of Trump Tower, with Trump himself appearing as a character in the work. Of course, because Trump isn't going to do any sort of work, artistic or otherwise. Well, period. He's just not going to do that. I mean, we should be upfront about that. But he's certainly not going to put out any kind of product that doesn't feature Trump appearing as a character in the work. Remember, he's in all the movies that get shot, or at least he's on footage for all the movies that get shot on Trump properties. Let's get to the good stuff. Detailed sex acts are depicted, including BDSM and the rape of a woman, which we should probably exclude from the usual umbrella of sex acts. That's just a plain old assault using sexual organs. But so I don't know. I guess it's a sex act. But you know what I'm trying to get at here. I'm just bad at that particular categorization. But it's amazing that would get written into. I mean, 2011. Like I said, it's not ancient history. There's still rapes. I mean, obviously they happen, and they'll be included even in works of fiction to try to lend some realism to it. But anyway, we don't need to get to this level of literary criticism for Trump Tower, I'm sure. This is all just by way of saying he fills the thing with sex. It's a bunch of sex stories. That's really all there is in it, actually. But there's more plot, according to Wikipedia. An employee of the building is, we're still on the sex. An employee of the building is described as having sex on the set of The Celebrity Apprentice. Wow, how did they ever come up with that? Oh, my goodness, that's such an inventive mind Donald Trump has. I'll bet anything that employees of the buildings had sex on the set of The Celebrity Apprentice. The plot moves from erotica, loosely defined, to murder mystery. And the building manager is initially a suspect before later being cleared. Hooray, they saved the day. Bill Clinton, who many others would tell you has a sex cult around him, and other celebrities also appear in cameo appearances in the book. This is, of course, 2011. They were still friends, right? And maybe they still are. Who knows? I don't know. Weird people. Esquire placed the work within the genre of erotic literature. What else are you going to do with it? But as a whole, that's not just like, well, there was a lot of sex in the book, but it's a novel. No, it's erotic literature. In other words, President Donald Trump, darling of the evangelical community, has one novel out, but it's an erotic novel. And then I guess he realized maybe by 2011 he was thinking of running for president in 2012. He's like, I can't have my name on an erotic novel. What am I, Newt Gingrich or somebody else that might do something dumb like that? Who didn't somebody else do that too and got themselves in trouble? I don't know if they considered their book to be an erotic novel, but they were, oh my God, there's sex in the book. Okay. So Esquire, are they like expert enough to tell me for certain that is erotic literature and nothing else? I'll take their word for it. A book review in the New York Post, that's where I go for book reviews, compared the storyline to the novel 50 Shades of Grey. That did well. That had got such high ratings, I gotta have one of these. Playground Magazine. Who? I don't know. I was gonna say, let's look that up, but I might not want to do that. Playground Magazine wrote that Trump Tower was itself a phallic object in the work, and I don't doubt that. The Huffington Post called the book incredibly sexist. Tango Magazine, don't know it, said it had high levels of sexual kinkiness. New York Magazine called it a very, very sexist novel. What's wrong with being sexist, right? The Late Show with Stephen Colbert host, who by the way, also very creative, his name is Stephen Colbert, discussed the book on his show. So it's out there. I just, I don't know why. But here's the plot synopsis of it, and some of this is repetitive. The novel is set within a fictional version of Trump Tower in New York City, New York. A version of Donald Trump appears as a fictional character in the novel. I don't know whether it's... I guess now that calls into question, is he named Donald Trump or not? I mean, I don't know what the point of calling the book Trump Tower is if he's not Donald Trump. Maybe it's Donald Trump Jr. Possible. It's Ivanka. That's it. The Trump character is described in the novel as giving out details of his sex life to others, making hiring and firing decisions, and denigrating the mental status of tenants residing in his building. That sounds a lot like Donald Trump. So Donald Trump, I'm sure, is doing all of this stuff. And yeah, by the way, so it's a little bit like him. And P.S., yeah, there's no compromat on this guy, right? The P-tape is totally fake. This is the novel he writes about himself. This den of iniquity known as the phallic symbol known as Trump Tower. And let me tell you about the sex I had last night. I want to hire and fire some people. And also, P.S., all of my tenants are crazy. They're insane. They're lunatics. That's his day. That's not a novel. Trump Tower portrays the machinations of the love lives engaged in by both residents of the building, in addition to the employees who work inside of the facility. Some of them are probably employed for that purpose, but okay. Sex acts are depicted within the novel, including those displaying sexual kinkiness and bondage. Congratulations, I would say. Dominance, submission, and sadomasochism, which, I mean, is this disturbing imagery for you to think about with Donald Trump involved? Think about it. Well, okay, I don't want to give away any of the fun details of the book. I don't know what happened in there, but you can picture in your mind what that might look like. But you may need to get to the nearest hospital or healthcare provider. If you're under the care of the physician now, or you're on any prescription drugs, I would recommend that you not think about it too much. Just take it at face value that sexual kinkiness and bondage, dominance, submission, and sadomasochism are all a part of the novel Trump Tower. A worker in the book is depicted in a sex act occurring on this set of The Celebrity Apprentice inside of Trump Tower, which some of which later became campaign space, by the way. Women appear in the book, you'll never guess how, with detailed descriptions based on their perceived level of physical attractiveness. She was an 8. She's a 10. She could have had bigger boobs, but I don't know. A rape of a woman is described in detail within the first chapter of the book. I don't know whether it's Ivana. I got no idea. Of course, it was alleged at some point that he had raped his first wife, Ivana. Michael Cohen, his attorney, of course, famously denying that there was any such thing as spousal rape, and that was rather controversial. After its initial foray into erotica with the first section of the work, the tale subsequently becomes a murder mystery. Why not? One of the main protagonists of the book is the building manager of Trump Tower, Pierre Belasco. And I don't know whether that's the character name or the real person's name or neither or both, who attempts to ensure stable operation of the facility. Great motivation for that character. The building manager thinks internally in the beginning of the work. This is what he thinks. Donald Trump, I guess this is a quote, so I guess they do call the Donald Trump character in the book is named Donald Trump. So, again, it's pretty, I guess it had to be, right, in order for him to sell books. Otherwise, why buy it? The building manager, apparently, his internal thought is Donald Trump only thinks he rules Trump Tower. That's dicey. Watch out, man. You can get fired. He attempts to prove this throughout the work. Now, at the conclusion of the work, Trump appears and usurps power from the building manager. I take it back, right? The building manager was a suspect, though, in a murder mystery, and by the conclusion of the work, he is confirmed to have not been the killer. Of course, if you ask Donald Trump, by the way, you're going to write a novel? Yes. What's it going to be about? It's going to be about Trump Tower. That's a documentary. Well, I'm going to make it fictionalized. I'm going to make people have more sex. They're going to have sex on the set of Celebrity Apprentice. That's okay. That's attractive for book sales. But again, not fiction per se, is it? Not per se, no. Okay, so what can you do to make this more novelty? I know, murder. Because he's obsessed with crime, right? So it's going to be a crime novel. It's going to be a creative one, like, somebody's mailing untraceable poisons, or I don't know. I don't know how they killed the guy, but murder mystery it is. So, but because the guy is an employee of Trump Tower, we wouldn't have somebody who's a murderer working for us. So I can't have that. The brand would not, we can't have that. The residents would be very upset to find out that the building manager is a murderer. So we got to rewrite. I need him to not be the murderer. Okay. I wonder who the murderer is. It turns out to be, Rosie O'Donnell, maybe. The novel features cameo appearances from fictional versions of celebrities, including Bill Clinton, who is probably also not the murderer in this. But, okay. Now here's where the weirdness of the book and the rights and the credits comes in. This is a long time to spend on this book that nobody ever heard of, but I don't know why nobody ever heard of it. Donald Trump initially attempted to produce a television series titled Trump Tower, which would have been modeled after soap operas Dallas Dynasty and Upstairs Downstairs. MVP Entertainment Production Company hired, employee Bob Frederick worked with Trump, and they contracted with a writer based in Los Angeles to write the plot of the potential television series. Trump pitched the idea to TV networks in earnest, not ironically, during the period of the 1990s. It goes that far back. Trump convinced Showtime networks to create a television pilot episode, which did not further develop into a full television series. So this is pre-Apprentice, right? Or when did The Apprentice start? Do I have to actually look this up now? All right, I'll take a look. But in the 1990s, was he already doing it? Because, I mean, if it wouldn't make any sense to say, well, a character in the book has sex on the set of The Celebrity Apprentice, and everybody would say, what's that? Yeah, it's not until 2004. So they definitely rework it at some point. So at first he's pitching. That's it. They tried to do TV show first, and then it didn't work, and then they novelized it. Now I remember. Okay. Just getting my bearings here. So where were we? He's trying to pitch it to the TV because he doesn't want to write anything. He just wants to see it on the screen. Lots of naked girls, please. Trump convinced Showtime Networks to create a pilot. They didn't go for it, though. Interesting, like that. He convinces people to produce things all the time. Remember those the limousines he made in conjunction with Cadillac, and he got himself a couple of prototypes made, and then they were like, "We're not going to make this piece of crap." Anyway, Trump received payment for television rights to the series at that point in time, but they didn't continue with the project. After this setback, Trump next took his Trump Tower television show pitch in 2008. He let it lie dormant for a while to the television network Lifetime. But by this time, he's already like into The Apprentice. So he's got some TV juice. Back then, it's just, here's a famous dilettante wants to be on TV, I guess. Trump was slated to be the narrator of the Lifetime version of the Trump Tower television series. Interesting. The novel, initially attributed to Trump, carried the same title and basic plot outline as his previously pitched television series. So it didn't change and he didn't evolve it. And that might just be because his inspiration was actually Trump Tower, and people just continued basically conducting themselves exactly the same way in the 80s, 90s, and into 2000s and 2010s. So there's nothing to change. The novel was first published in 2011 by Vanguard Press, attributed to Donald Trump as author and Jeffrey Robinson as ghostwriter. The original cover of the novel stated Donald J. Trump with Jeffrey Robinson as the author. The book had the tagline, of course, right? It's got to have a tagline, obviously, as many books do, but it's Donald Trump has written the book, and it's Donald Trump writing the tagline or insisting on the tagline. The tagline is the sexiest novel of the decade. Of course, more superlatives. And what decade was it? It's this decade. So has anything sexier been written? I don't know. I mean, it was released the same year as 50 Shades of Grey. If you thought that was a sexy novel, then you're screwed if you were a big Donald Trump Tower fan. Okay. It was originally advertised as the debut novel of Donald Trump. Marketing materials said the book was within the same vein as Hotel by Arthur Haley. I don't know the book. I assume that's a terrible comparison, and he's in way over his head. When the book was first given its initial international standard book number, primary authorship was ascribed to Donald Trump. That changes. I'll tell you more after this. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Thanks for waiting with us through our third and final break, if I remember correctly. I'm a little disoriented today. Still trying to get the hang of where everything is and grabbing one of three, do we say computer mice in plural? I don't know. There's several lying around here and several screens, and I'll have to get oriented to all of this. Anyway. Where were we? We were talking about Trump Tower, the novel. I think we can probably bring this to a conclusion some point soon. I don't know. I found it fascinating. It's amazing the things he tries to get away with. And it's amazing the things that money and power and privilege can make possible. That you can spend time pursuing something as dumb as this. Well, I don't know. It's pretty amazing what money can do for you these days. So, anyway, like I said, they were, marketing materials were comparing the book to Hotel by Arthur Haley. You'll have to tell me if you know the book, whether that makes any sense based on the description here. But where we left off was Trump initially is claiming authorship of this thing. Of course, it's written material. There's no way he was behind it. And they were pretty open about their having had a ghostwriter on the project. But like with many of his books, they say it's him, but they're fair and note that a ghostwriter had something to do with it. But importantly, initially in 2011, at the first publication, Donald Trump says, yeah, my book. Sure, I had help, but my book. The cover, let's see, notes here, another edition attributed to Donald Trump was released the same year in audiobook format by Playaway Digital Audio. The cover designer of the work was Jeff Williams. Book vendors and librarians received marketing materials for the book in 2011 with its original cover featuring Trump as primary author, with Robinson's name appearing below Trump's. The literature purveyors subsequently received a notice that the original version of the work would not be sent out to them. Instead, they were sent a copy of the 2012 edition. Perseus Books Group, supervisor of Vanguard Press, told the Huffington Post, when contacted that year, that the first published version of the title from 2011 was unavailable. So they very clearly made a decision somewhere in between 2011 and 2012 as he's gearing up for possibly running for president in 2012. Remember, he was teasing on that. And they go back and they say, let's change history on this. Remember, you can't erase history. You can't pull down monuments. You can't erase history or undo it. But we can when it comes to denying that Donald Trump ever wrote this book. Besides, everybody knows he never really wrote this book. But now we don't even want him associated with it. The novel was subsequently published in 2012 with Jeffrey Robinson credited as sole author. An ebook of the second version was published the same year. So if you have some that say by Donald Trump, they're collector's items, I guess. A review of the work by Donald Trump was posted to the back. I see. A review of the work that was now being marketed as Jeffrey Robinson's work of fiction was on the back of the 2012 edition. Trump reviews the book that a couple months ago he claimed to have written. So not exactly a real unbiased review of the work, obviously. You were never going to get that from Donald Trump, but in this situation it's even more ridiculous. Trump stated he was eager to see the novel adapted into a television series. That was the original idea, so he's really evolved on that. Trump posted to Twitter, yes, in 2012, to promote the work, calling it a must-read. And I saw the tweet this morning. I looked it up. It's there. It's nothing spectacular. It's just kind of funny that it even exists. The 2012 edition of the book was for sale in the Trump Tower gift shop in 2016. So during campaign season, they were selling it. Of course, they were selling the Jeffrey Robinson authored version of it. But I don't think Jeffrey Robinson reworked the text any. I don't think I doubt very much that he wasted any time in doing that. He just took the 2011 book and recovered it, and he was happy to claim all credit for it. That was probably fine for him. I wonder if he got all the money from it, or whether he probably had to give some back to Donald Trump for having given him all the stories and for allowing it to be sold in Trump Tower as well. It was marketed in Trump Tower in a display case in the Trump store in Trump Tower. There's a Trump store, alongside copies of other books authored by Trump. Of course, they're all only authored by Trump in the same sense that this one was, so it makes a certain amount of sense. Let's see. Right, so we read that Esquire magazine called it erotic literature. It was Sarah Rentz writing the review there. Fox News concurred, calling it an erotic novel. Jennifer Gould Keel of the New York Post commented, Trump Tower is a fun read about the depths of degradation residents go to in order to live in the Midtown building. Now that makes it sound intriguing. That's some good compromise going on there. The depths of degradation residents go to in order to live in the Midtown building. In other words, it's not, I'm rich, and so therefore I live here because I bought the damn thing. There's something else to it. The cover, by the way, of the original version is pictured in Wikipedia. Trump Tower, a novel, Donald J. Trump with Jeffrey Robinson. Up at the top, there's a little tagline on there. It's not the sexiest novel of the decade. Instead, it says, where everyone has a secret. Trump Tower. And he's, by the way, the purveyor of these secrets. They're not secrets. He's telling you what happened, but, it's fictionalized. My good friend, Stuart Rohr, Not Stewie Rohr. No, it's Stuart Rohr, somebody completely different. Totally did exactly the same thing that Stuart Rohr did, but in a completely different way. So you can see this is probably about as close to a Trump Tower confessional as you'll actually get. But of course, you won't be able to pin anything on anyone because he'll say, it's fiction. I said so right here. It's just very interesting. So where everyone has a secret, like P-tapes. Anyway, is there really anything else worth mining out of this? I love that line, though. And Jennifer Gould Keel, who wrote that line, said she compared the plot of the work to the novel 50 Shades of Grey. She wrote that its writing style was akin to a masculine take on Danielle Steele, if that helps give you any idea. Keel concluded the book had potential to be developed into a movie or a television show. Playground magazine journalist Jaime Martinez, or Jaime, it's X, but is it pronounced Jaime? I don't know. Wrote that Trump Tower in the novel was a literary device used as a metaphor for a phallic object. Huffington Post reporter Todd Van Luling called the book incredibly sexist. Van Luling criticized the writing style of the book, good idea, pointing out numerous typographical errors and abrupt tonal shifts. That sounds Trump-ish for you. Colbert also discussed it, as we mentioned earlier. Colbert commented a more appropriate title for Trump Tower would have been Symbolic Penis, and I think he may be right there. Tango magazine, and their talk about the significant amounts of sexual kinkiness exhibited in the book. Also compared it to 50 Shades of Grey. Criticized the work. This is Rebecca Jane Stokes for Tango magazine. Criticized the work for appealing to a mainly male audience. The book might present a kinky escape for the male of the species, but if you don't have a penis, and a lot of people don't, this probably isn't the type of sexy story you're looking for. And I would gather that probably a lot of our penist friends likewise don't really get into this particular kind of sexy story, but it's funny, at least. I enjoy the description of it so far. New York Magazine journalist Caitlin Fontana called the work a very, very sexist novel. Fontana concluded, maybe you should skip Trump Tower unless you're a sadomasochist and not the fun kind. That's more time than literally almost anybody would spend on this book, but you can't get in the mainstream media to pay attention to it. And in this case, with good reason. But I thought it was fun. It's an easy way to start the Monday, making fun of Donald Trump, and but it does raise some serious issues. Just the way he handles things, the way he handles the books, the authorship. Yes, I wrote it. No, I didn't write it. Oh my God, political scrutiny. I'll duck this thing. I don't change anything about the way I work and just because of politics except this thing, and brings back to mind just how tawdry a place Trump Tower is in his own mind. I'm not just me. I'm not the only one imagining this thing. I imagine it because I can see that they did this on purpose. Trump built the place as a sex temple for himself and his friends, and that's how he got them to buy units there and elsewhere in other buildings as well. And that was the key to his so-called real estate success. Why else would any of those people paid so much money for such trashy apartments? Okay, I think that's really all there is about the book, I believe. I'll move on with this, and I'll get to some political news and some other stories. We'll round out our Monday morning and remind ourselves that we are chiefly a political radio program. In Congress, I'll go from that sex cult over to this other one, and there is a new sex scandal out there, by the way, in Congress. I forgot to mention this one. Did I put I'm so bored with Republicans getting caught having affairs that I might not even have put this one aside to report to you. There was a lot that I put aside over the weekend, and that might not even have been one of them. I was bored by it, and I think I tweeted out, oh well, caught another one, and I'm like snoring over it. Z's I'm typing out. And I didn't. I don't think I even included it. I should look around to look at my own feed here in order to figure out who it was. And I'm now curious. It's funny that you don't. a sex scandal with a Republican member of Congress. Oh, really? Okay. Moving along. I'm pretty sure I retweeted it from The Hill earlier in the weekend, or maybe even on Friday. Wow, this was a long time ago. And then there was all this other stuff and hurricanes and crazy people and things happening. If I don't find it in the next minute or two, I guess I'll abandon the effort. But maybe you know who I'm talking about. I can't even remember the guy's name offhand. But I'm pretty sure there was a picture involved. There it is. I found it all the way back 2 days ago. GOP lawmaker admits to having extramarital affair. It's in The Hill. We'll just briefly note who it is so that you're up to date on such things. Who is it? Representative Tim Murphy of Pennsylvania, Republican of Pennsylvania, on Thursday publicly admitted having an extramarital affair, saying it was nobody's fault but my own. Okay, who cares? Last year I became involved in an affair with a personal friend. This is nobody's fault but my own, and I offer no excuses. To the extent that there should be any blame in this matter, it falls solely upon me. Any fallout from this? Not really. He confirmed the affair after the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette was granted a court order to unseal the divorce action of the other couple involved. Oh, wow. So he's a homewrecker. Well, Murphy is not a party in the divorce action. The husband of the woman with whom he was having an affair sought to depose him in July, according to the Post-Gazette. Murphy asked the press to respect his family's privacy in the statement. Of course, he didn't respect the other family's privacy, but whatever, you should respect his. I'm sure he's, gotten God's forgiveness. So, moving along, I mentioned to you that there are other things going on in Congress besides the sex scandals. They're coming back into session, but I just thought I ought to note weather-related. Hurricane Irma forces House vote cancellations. That's to be expected. There will be members who are stranded, who can't travel, etc. It's not a big postponement. They were going to have votes today, but they postponed votes until Tuesday, which is normally how they operate in the House anyway. So it's not a big deal, but it's just, I bring that up in light of the fact that they have so few working days in September to get their stuff done. But then again, they got the continuing resolution and debt ceiling and hurricane relief taken care of like that. That's a little snap for those of you who couldn't pick that up on the radio. Once Trump decided to be mavericky and independent and upend 150 years of two-party rule in this country by taking the only deal that was really even theoretically possible and doing the bare minimum necessary to keep the government from closing and or collapsing, given that failure to move forward would have meant no hurricane relief, which really would have been a pretty major PR disaster for him. Okay, let's see. Other interesting things. Here's something we're going to have to save for another day, but in case we never get to it. Kate Sherrill shared this one with me. I think we'll have to parse this one and use our time wisely on it, maybe as a background bit of info. But she knows our overarching themes here, and she sent me this tweet from Jonathan Tepper, who says, fascinating, 30% of luxury real estate flagged by U.S. Treasury as suspicious for money laundering. Well, we're always all about the money laundering issue here because that's all Trump does with his time when he's not writing erotic novels. Fiction, I'm telling you. Laundering money in. But yeah, we have said before, luxury real estate, I think, loans itself almost like no other business to money laundering. And that's, again, by design. It shouldn't surprise anybody that they've lobbied hard to keep the regulations that prevent money laundering in many other financial sectors from intruding on real estate, because that's how these guys make their money. And they make such obscene amounts of it, and they sit on such large piles of it, they can pass it off to enough legislators that they can continue to enjoy those protections. Okay. Another subject we'll just have to do lightning round of what's in pocket rather than doing anything else in depth since we spent so much time in the book. I loved it, but we shouldn't have done it. I saw over the weekend a tweet from Kamala Harris, who I'm not going to join the Kamala Harris attack squadrons. They don't need that. She doesn't need that from me. And it's misplaced, I think, largely. But, okay, she's clearly harboring some larger ambitions, which is what politicians do, and I am okay with it. And she's a woman doing it and a woman of color doing it, and I'm okay with all of that too. And I'm not afraid of her being a strong any one of those things. It's okay. And I might even vote for her later on if she runs for president, because what the hell else am I going to do? I don't know. I have no idea what I would do in a primary anyway. But I'm not worried about her. I'm not angry at her. I'm not pissed at the things she does. But I will say it does sort of get you into trouble a little bit, theoretically, when you're trying to get so far out on some of these positions and stake out your place in the wider progressive world. She tweeted something that I thought, okay, this is helpful. She's trying to dip a toe into this area. Everyone's talking about it, obviously. She tweeted, Russia interfered with the election of the President of the United States. No matter who you voted for, it should trouble all of us. And she's tagging here The Beat with Ari. And I guess is that Ari Melber's show? Yes. And so she must have been on it or was watching it and discussing the Trump-Russia issues. And, thank you for your concern. It was well placed, and I'm thankful that you think that's the case. But it did bring to mind for me, for instance, that moment so evocative of that other moment from before in 2000 when House members, during the counting of the Electoral College votes on the House floor in 2017, following the 2016 election, once again raised objections to the counting of the electoral vote because there were questions, even at that point, floating out there about the propriety of the vote and the vote count and the outcome of it and what happened here and wasn't there possibly interference, and shouldn't we look at this stuff? And once again, just as you may remember it from perhaps the Michael Moore movie, Fahrenheit 9/11, the House members, and almost uniformly here, House members of color, standing and insisting something has gone terribly wrong and we owe it to America to look into it and to postpone these proceedings until we can figure out just long enough so we can figure out what the hell is going on here, like the travel ban, right? Everybody's for that. Okay, I'll be hypocritical. I'll borrow that line. But once again, just like it was in 2001, you needed a senator, a single senator. Any senator will do. Needed to sign on to this effort in order for it to be taken up for debate. It would have been disposed of immediately. That's true. And I'm sure that was in the back of the mind of every senator who even contemplated joining the objection. But the House members put themselves out there. And once again, not a single senator would even validate their concerns. Now, granted, we've developed an awful lot more evidence between here and there. And granted, it was doomed to failure. And granted, Kamala Harris was herself a freshman senator, and the Senate has some different rules, not rules, but norms and mores about freshmen and what they do there versus what they're not supposed to do. So, again, I understand, and maybe she only came to that realization later, but it was sort of frustrating to see this sort of thing. Just as it's been frustrating, for instance, to see Max Baucus over the weekend. I didn't even put this one aside. I'll have to go find a reference for it. Max Baucus, who infamously dragged out the healthcare reform process and the Affordable Care Act and did everything he could to push it rightward and centerward and every place but where it really belonged, is now among the many out there saying, you know what would be a great idea? Single payer. That's what we should be doing. We're inevitably going to end up there. We might as well start talking about it now. Max Baucus. Well, okay. He's probably learned a lot since then, too. But, of course, he's not running for re-election, and maybe he's freer to say such things. I'll take it. I'm glad he said it on balance. But it was upsetting and annoying, just as it was a little bit upsetting and annoying to see Kamala Harris saying, well, everybody should worry about this. This should be non-controversial to say this. Right. Well, it was non-controversial to say that in early January, too. And so House members did, and you left them hanging. I just got to say that. Will I forgive you? Yeah. But you left them hanging. That sucks. That's not a thing to do. Okay, you did it. I can move on from there. What about other things that happened and maybe we will be asked to move on from? Here's one from which I can't, and no one else will want to either. I'll mention this. Did we all see over the weekend Benjamin Netanyahu's son ends up posting one of these anti-Semitic global Jewish conspiracy cartoons on his Facebook page, only to get likes and thumbs up from David Duke. It created a bigger controversy, obviously, in Israel than it did here. And he removes the thing, but all the comments are still there. How do we get to this point? There's a lot of thinking on this, and there was a really interesting op-ed written in Haaretz about it, which is really interesting and impacts. It's like the final nail in the coffin for relations between the American Jewish community and Israel's current super ultra right-wing government on a number of fronts. It's just like unbelievable that he would go ahead and just talk about you're not normal. How do you get to that? How does that even happen on this planet? And the answer is Trump has effed everything up. That's just basically what it is. They were doing this. I mean, they were right-wing and effed up in Israel all by themselves without Donald Trump coming along, but it only complicated things and made things worse. And it's just an astonishing development there. Very weird. And I don't know what to say about it. Since we only have a few minutes to do the rest of the show, how about one other weird and otherwise not Kagro in the Morning-ish story about Tesla? I saw Charles Gaba tweeting this one, and it is a story that I think brings us back to Jalopnik for what might be the third visit to jalopnik.com. They should be sponsoring this show. Do you guys have 2 nickels to rub together? Send me a nickel if that's the case. Here's the story. Tesla remotely extended the range of its Florida owners' cars to assist in hurricane evacuation. It's a very interesting story on a number of levels. Charles noted that it is sort of fascinating, but also kind of creepy, like the idea of remotely doing anything to the cars is kind of creepy and weird. But here's the deal. It also engendered a very strange debate. The bottom line of what happened here is that Tesla, early on, anyway, it now no longer does this. What can I say? They offered a discounted version of their early cars, but with a limited range per charge. All the cars were physically the same. The cars can go about 250 miles on a single charge, right? And they're expensive cars. Tesla, enormously expensive. That's sort of a plaything for rich people, but it's neat because it's electric and we like to encourage electric vehicles, I think. Although I'm still open to charges of, still got to burn coal to get that electricity, don't you? Not necessarily, but okay. Anyway, the thing is, they're enormously expensive, but you could buy a lower cost version for something like several $1,000s less. You could buy a version that was software limited, that would still be capable of going 250 miles, but would be software limited to going only 210 miles. I don't know how they settled on those numbers. I think that's actually pretty generous in terms of offering a discount and getting most of the capability of the car. But a lot of people were really angered by the fact that there was sort of like you had to pay extra, the way they viewed it, in order to get the full range that the car was capable of. Whereas I kind of saw it pretty quickly as, well, maybe it's interesting for a little less money. In other words, they're putting presumably somewhat more electric cars in more hands. They didn't discount it deeply enough to make it an everyday vehicle for normal people. That's true. They could have done that. But more people took the cars and put them on the road because of the discount. And because it was just a software limitation, you could change your mind later. And if you said, for instance, I could see, you get the idea. I'm going to play with one of these toys. I'm a very rich guy, or maybe even not so rich, and I want one of these things, or I'm going to save up because I'm into the environment, electric car. On the other hand, it's a sedan, so, I'm just going to be driving around town with it. Why shouldn't I pay $5,000, $10,000 less for one that'll only go 210 miles? I'm not going to go 210 miles ever in this car. And if I ever have to evacuate because of a hurricane, I'm taking the SUV so I can put more things in it. I'm surprised that anybody wanted to try to evacuate in their Tesla, but maybe they just want it damaged in the storm. Anyway, to me, it was like, okay, a lower price, more cars out there. That's good. Plus, you get almost the full range, and you can change your mind later. If you decide, I really would like all of that range, you can just snap your fingers and do it. Pay them, and now you got the full freight. You don't have to buy a second car. You don't have to make decisions about which model should I buy. I thought that was pretty interesting. And of course, nice of them to then say, oh my gosh, people are going to have to evacuate. Somebody contacted Tesla and said that was their plan, and can I temporarily get the full range? And they agreed to do it, and that's nice. And I'm glad they worked it out, and it's good PR, generally speaking, I think, for the company. But I don't know. Not everybody agrees, and not everybody thinks it would be wise necessarily to evacuate in a Tesla. But I guess if gas was hard to get, and it really was, then maybe escaping in an electric vehicle was a viable option. I won't question the guy's lifestyle choices, but I thought it was an interesting way of looking at it alternatively. Not that I need to be particularly generous to Elon Musk. I don't think he has broken strongly enough with Donald Trump in all of this. But hey, he's not listening to me either. Let's talk about what we are listening to, and that's the after show, who's going to that clean up on all the stories I ignored, and there ought to be a lot of them today. Here is the summary of what you're going to expect to follow up this show. Insiders claim CIA Director Mike Pompeo is turning the agency into a Christian hotbed, straight out of The Handmaid's Tale. Again with The Handmaid's Tale. We're in trouble on that front. Jeff Sessions lied to Congress about his Russian connections. So, of course, he wants to force the entire national security staff to take polygraph tests in his war on leakers. Sure, why not? And in a bombshell report that shows a direct line from the Kremlin to Trump winning the presidency, the FBI is looking into Russia's Sputnik news agency. How about the last half? Despite Chief of Staff John Kelly's attempts to shut him out, Stephen Miller's power grows at the White House. And a few more items I'll tell you about right after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
How about this for a tricky story? A Pace University law professor opines that Mueller may have to grant Trump immunity, but somehow, magically, could still prosecute him. I'd love to hear about that one. Plus, the Connect, Unite, Act, Daily Kos community calendar, and more on the After Show with Wink and Justice next.